because a tactical nuclear weapon, as horrific as it may be, and as crossing that threshold as significant as that is, has a tactical effect. Now, it can be depending on the yield, in other words, the explosive power of the particular munition that is selected, the particular nuclear device, that can be very substantial. But it's not going to reverse this stark situation that faces Russia, that they have lost the strategic initiative. And I don't think there's anything they can do to reverse the fact that Ukraine is out mobilizing them. Yes, they have a population that's several times that of Ukraine. But, when they did the last partial mobilization, more Russian men left the country than reported to the recruiting station. So this partial mobilization, this conscription, is not going well. They're running out of equipment to provide to these soldiers. They're not training them well at all. They're basically throwing them into combat. And predictably, they are cannon fodder when it comes to the skill that is required for this. So that doesn't mean, again, that those numbers don't matter. Cannon fodder can hold you up, especially in urban settings where if they get dug in, it's very difficult to get them out. But that doesn't give you confidence that they can remedy the situation that has been so troubling for them, which is the inability to generate combined arms effects. And so the way they achieved additional ground after these early failures, noting that they did seize ground down in the south and they did eventually take Mariupol, key port city on the Sea of Azov and so forth. But what eventually they've done is they just run into the Ukrainians, they stop, and then they just hammer with artillery, mortars, other forms of indirect fire, occasionally some close air support, although that has been abysmal as well. They've never achieved air superiority, much less the kind of air supremacy that we have enjoyed really for a number of decades. And they just hammer away, and they do what they did in the Battle of Grozny. As you'll recall, they essentially destroyed the city to save it. They did the same thing when it came to the Battle of Aleppo. That's not the way that you proceed effectively and efficiently and impressively. And oh, by the way, even if you take that location, what you've done is destroyed it. And it's not of as much use to you, to put it mildly, as it would have been if the infrastructure hadn't all been collapsed. I said that Russia would not take Kyiv, much less ever control it, which was a bit contrary to what even most governments and other pundits were saying. And in part, it's because I've watched the Ukrainian forces develop since 2014. I've been to the front lines in Donbass. I've been out in Kharkiv. I've been in Kyiv talking with their military leaders, the heads of their military industries, the leaders and so forth. The last time was shortly after President Zelensky was elected. So it's pre-COVID, to be sure, but still they had made enormous advances. The US, UK, and other NATO countries had really put their shoulder to the wheel. Intelligence agencies were helping, National Security Agency on the cyber side. And so they were dramatically improved, really just orders of magnitude better than they were in 2014. Then, of course, you have the beginning of this massive quantity of arms and ammunitions, beginning actually with the UK, with the first one on the ground with the NLAW, I think it was, the anti-tank guided missiles, followed by then the huge number of javelins from the US, then also the shoulder-launched guided anti-air defense missiles and so forth. Those helped enormously in those early battles. And then we've always known that the Russians don't have a non-commissioned officer corps, that their logistics, once they leave a railhead, they're very, very good on the rail, much better than we are, frankly, because they control it when they want to. They have entire units that just exist to facilitate this using their rail system through a vast country. But once they come off the rail, they have perhaps 1/4 or 1/5 of the logistics infrastructure, the organizational structure that we have that enables us to be expeditionary, to move and still continue to supply. They just don't have that. Where I was surprised was just the sheer ineptitude of the campaign design, taking on all these different offensives simultaneously, sort of a main effort, but not really. And then actually what did surprise me, because if I'd had months in the field with units as a commander, as they did, they were having maneuvers in Belarus and in Russia on the borders of Ukraine for many months prior to the invasion. I mean, I would have loved to have had that. We did have, fairly intensive workup. But once we got to Kuwait, it was a pretty brisk pace. And we were consumed an awful lot with just sheer logistics issues and preparation of the force in that regard, rather than big maneuvers and so forth, in which you could fine-tune combined arms operations. And the Russians turned out to be abysmal. They have still never demonstrated the ability to combine the effects of tanks supported by infantry who keep the shoulder-launched anti-tank guided missiles off them, supported by air defense, keep any kind of enemy aircraft off them, mortars and artillery, so indirect fire, and keep it very close to you in the front, but safely, obviously, which is an art form in and of itself. Engineers to reduce obstacles, along with explosive ordnance disposal, EW, electronic warfare, to jam the enemy's networks, your networks keeping up with you, your logistics right up there, aero medevac, and all the rest of this. They have just not demonstrated that whatsoever. And that's what a truly professional military does. And in that regard, again, just because they had so many months out there training, I was a bit stunned that they weren't better. That simple things like road movement tables, how do you have a 40 or 50 mile traffic jam to begin your war? Well, it's because you haven't planned well, and then your execution was even worse. So in that sense, yes. And I guess I did think there would be certain areas where just the sheer overwhelming size at the beginning, before we really began ramping up, before we started providing, way over 130 howitzers, for example, 155 millimeter heavy, 1 million rounds of 155 millimeter howitzer ammunition. These are staggering numbers. The high mobility artillery rocket system with, again, thousands of those rockets, and then the precision munitions for those that allow a round, on the dinner table that accurate at 80 kilometers from one of these HIMARS systems. And then the Excalibur precision munition for the artillery as well, about half that range. All of this. And then just as I mentioned earlier, the extraordinarily impressive mobilization of the entire country in Ukraine. The biggest of the big ideas beyond, I don't want to ride, I want ammunition, I'm staying right here in Kyiv and my family's staying with me, was, of course, we're all going to mobilize and all men in Ukraine are going to stay. Yes, if women and children have to leave because of the situation, that's understandable, but all able-bodied males are going to pitch in, and they did. And that's the biggest of the big ideas. We are all in this together. This is our war of independence, and we intend to win it. And then the recruiting, training, equipping, organizing, and they're really doing real training. As you know, the UK, it's publicly known, is training units, not just individual soldiers. The US is doing the same. It's publicly known that we help them war game the offensive in the East at the War Game Center in Germany, at the training center in Germany, the same one at which we war gamed the invasion of Iraq when I was a 2-star general. And there's more of that going on. Now we're training them on the more advanced anti-ballistic missile system, the Patriot, and other air defense systems. So this takes time. The latest contribution by our different nations of infantry fighting vehicles will be very important. It will take some time to get the Ukrainians. But, the Ukrainians have demonstrated an affinity, a seriousness, a purpose about the training that is also absolutely, I think, unparalleled in my experience of trying to help other countries train their forces. And I've done that with a number of different ones over the years. They won't take coffee breaks. They rush through their meals. They want to get back to the training. They don't want to stop at 6